Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Richard Strauss's Ariadne auf Naxos, which is sadly my last review here in London because I'll be flying to Milan very early in the morning, which was shown at the Royal Opera House. The conductor was Antonio Pappano, who is also the music director of the Royal Opera House. The production was done by Christoph Floy. The lighting was handled by Jennifer Tipton. The choreographer was Beata Folak. And the concertmaster of the Royal Opera House Orchestra was Vasco Vasiliev. Now, there are some notable aspects of this opera in particular. First of all is how it was rewritten. In the 1912 version of Ariadne auf Naxos, the composer was not present in the scene, but only the Majordomo. And what's also worth mentioning is that Serbinetta's aria, Großmächtige Prinzessin, especially in the All sein Gott passage, was a lot higher, to the point where she sang a lot of F sharps and sustained a high E. Basically, this was in a much higher key, the key of E. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is how well written this opera is. It has a sense of wit and charm, especially in the prologue, because, well, the prologue was basically based off elements of Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, which was a French play done by Molière, known in English as The Bourgeois Gentleman. So there are a lot of elements that were very well written in this opera, especially when it comes to the dialogue between the music master and the Majordomo. Not to mention the passages of the comedians, Zerbinetta, Harlequin, Scaramuccio, Brigella, and Truffaldino. There's a lot of great banters going on between all of the comedians, especially with Ariadne, and in the prologue, the tenor, the servants, and the prima donna herself. And finally, this opera is a very great challenge for all three soprano types. Well, three soprano types to be specific. Ariadne has to be sung by a spinto or dramatic soprano that has very solid, round, low notes, especially in her two arias, Es gibt ein Reich, and her other aria, which she sang before that. So basically, she needs very good low notes and very piercing high notes as well. I mean, the highest note that she has sung would usually be a B flat. So it doesn't really need a super high soprano, but rather a soprano who can handle the tessitura of this very challenging role. Then we get to the composer, the pants role of this opera, who is only seen in the prologue. Now, even though he only has one scene that he's in, this is definitely a very challenging role as well, whether it be for a spinto soprano, a full lyric soprano, or even a dramatic soprano. Though nowadays he's performed by either a coloratura mezzo or a lyric mezzo. Basically, both sides, whether he be sung by a spinto soprano or a lyric mezzo, they need good high notes for this type of character. Not to mention very great acting chops, because the thing about the composer is that he is a very passionate character. Zena Jurinac basically stated that the composer is a young Schubert. He's an idealist. So the soprano or mezzo should be able to convey all of these fiery emotions that he has inside, especially in his scenes with the music master and Zerbinetta. Now, speaking of Zerbinetta, if you think Queen of the Night, Constanze, Blondchen, Giunia, Lucia, the Fille de Regiment Marie, Amina, Elvira Walton, Rosina in the soprano key of Barber of Seville, or even Gilda, Violetta, Oscar. If you think those roles for a coloratura soprano are tough, you have not seen Zerbinetta. Oh boy. This role is one of the toughest roles of the coloratura soprano repertoire. Simply put, her aria, Großmächtige Prinzessin, is a testament of how much stamina she needs vocally and theatrically. Well, look no further than the 1912 version, which is a lot higher than that of the 1916 version. Believe me, there have been sopranos that had to put up with all of the runs, the high notes, the trills, everything that's needed for a coloratura soprano. Whereas with the 1916 version, of course it's tough, but it's not that tough compared to the, well, much more difficult 1912 version. So basically speaking, when it comes to a coloratura soprano singing Zerbinetta, she has to have very great high notes. She has to have very clean attacks on the coloratura lines. She has to have great comedic timing and at times a very great physique as well, because this role is an acting role. It's not just a singing role. So simply put 2 and 2 together and you have, when it comes to the right coloratura soprano, a great Zerbinetta. The music master is only seen in the first part, but he needs a dramatic baritone who can be able to sing very powerfully. And lest I forget about the tenor role of Bacchus. Now, Bacchus requires a tenor who has a lot of great high notes and is very powerful in his voice. And when it comes to the 4 comedians, Harlequin, Truffaldino, Scaramuccio, and Brighella, these singers, well, basically a lyric baritone, lyric basso, buffo tenor, and a light lyric tenor, they all need to be sung very well and have very great chemistry. So that's a very interesting challenge about Ariadne auf Naxos as an opera. Not to mention, this is one of those operas, just like its predecessor, Rosenkavalier, and its successor, Arabella, Capriccio, and Intermezzo, that don't really sound like Strauss's other operas, you know, Salome, Elektra, Frau ohne Schatten, in which they have these booming orchestras and all of that stuff. No. This is a lot more lyrical in a lot of moments. But like I said, is very challenging for certain singers, especially that of Zerbinetta, Ariadne, the composer, and Bacchus. So, with that out of the way, what do I think about the production of this opera? It's actually quite interesting. The prologue begins, well, in what I like to call the 1990s, early 2000s setting. It's basically set in the entrance of an opera house, with the guests coming in very fancy clothing. And then, once we see the stage of the opera house rise up, we see the bottom part, which is basically the performer's little room in which they get changed, they put on their makeup and all that. And I have to say, it's actually very decent all around. The music master has a tuxedo. The same thing can be said about the Majordomo. The composer kind of has a tuxedo. Zerbinetta originally wears a red sports jacket, and she basically wears like shorts. Though when she gets changed, she has a little red dress, which I find very cute. And when we see the prima donna and the tenor, they're in their robes. And when we see them, like, before the show starts, the prima donna is in her, well, 18th century prima donna outfit. And the same thing can be said about the tenor, who is in a slightly 18th century outfit. And I have to say, the prologue was actually very decent so far. And then we get to the opera itself. I thought it was just absolutely well done. Of course, we could have used a little bit more scenery, like we would have some sand, we would have had some trees and all of that, probably some ocean waves and maybe like a huge pillar. But I thought it was able to have that type of chamber opera feel, since this is based somewhere in the 1700s, and this does look like to be chamber opera material. And on top of that, I really love the costumes of the nymphs, which really kind of separates them and gives them a little bit of a personality. Naiad basically wears some maid clothing, and she basically serves some tea. Dryad basically wears like governess clothing, and Echo wears page boy clothing. Now, these type of costumes really do give these nymphs some personality. And here's something quite hilarious, or not really just hilarious, but kind of interesting. The comedians come in more modern clothing, whereas Ariadne is in this black dress, and Bacchus is in like a black tuxedo and all that. So I thought it was just an interesting little mishmash of styles, which I thought was kind of interesting. But the huge selling point for this production definitely has to be in the final scene, when it comes to Ariadne and Bacchus exiting the stage in such in what I like to call the transfiguration of both Ariadne and Bacchus. I mean, my God, the backdrop turned all dark blue, and there were stars everywhere, and I thought it was just the best effect of this opera production in general. So overall, the production was actually very decent. It actually kept to what the libretto said, well, the spirit of what the libretto said, and it was very interesting having these mishmash of different costumes, which really made this opera very colorful. Now we get to the singing, which I am personally very excited to talk about. In the role of the prima donna and in the opera Ariadne, we have the great Finnish spinto soprano Karita Mattila. Now, for those of you who don't know who Karita Mattila is, she's basically a full lyric / spinto soprano who has been specializing in the 80s and 90s in a lot of Mozart roles. But later on, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and to this very day, she has been specializing in the more spinto, full lyric, and dramatic soprano repertoire. She basically started out as Fiordiligi, Donna Elvira, and the Countess Almaviva, but nowadays she has been singing roles like Elsa, Ariadne, Chrysothemis, Sieglinde, and, well, Tosca, I might add, and the Fidelio Leonora, who I saw back then, 7 years ago. Yeah, I actually saw Karita Mattila as Fidelio 7 years ago, and I thought she was very fantastic. Here as Ariadne, wow, just absolutely fantastic. She had the looks. I mean, she's a very beautiful, very sexy woman, even though she's currently in her 50s. It really shows just how, well, physical she is, and just how alluring she is, both in voice, body, and playing theatricality. She's definitely such a powerhouse. She was able to navigate all of those notes very, very well. And she was able to give Ariadne a very, very interesting layer of pathos, sadness, loneliness, and just a little bit of, like, the happiness that she wants to feel. As the prima donna, she was able to be very hammy in the most positive way ever. So all I have to say about Madame Mattila as Ariadne was that she was absolutely fantastic, both as a singer and as an actress. And I really hope that there are a lot more years to come from this veteran soprano. Her partner was Roberto Sokka, singing the role of the tenor and later on in the opera as Bacchus. Now, Roberto Sokka is an Italian-German full lyric tenor who specialized in the roles of Belmonte, the Duke of Mantua, Alfredo Jamon, and basically a lot of the roles in the full lyric tenor repertoire. Though nowadays he starts singing the spinto tenor repertoire and some of the dramatic tenor repertoire as well. Here, I thought he was absolutely great as Bacchus. The way he used his instrument to such a wonderful effect. He was able to use his full lyrical tenor voice very, very, very beautifully. And his duet with Madame Mattila was just absolutely flawless. Not to mention he was quite hammy in the prologue. So all I have to say is that he was absolutely fantastic. The role of the composer was sung by Romanian lyric mezzo-soprano, Ruxandra Donose. She has a lot of experience with the full lyric mezzo repertoire and even some of the lyric coloratura mezzo repertoire. Here, I thought she was just flawless. The attacks on the high notes that she did were just so thrilling, and her portrayal of the passionate composer was just so involving. She was a fantastic actress. She was able to play the composer's passion, his ambition, his idealism. She was able to play this part very, very well. With such a flawless bel canto technique, coupled by a very involved acting, she definitely was great in this type of role. And then we get to Zerbinetta, sung by Canadian lyric coloratura soprano Jane Archibald. Now, I've heard a couple of samples of Jane Archibald online, and she was absolutely fantastic. And my God, this is definitely no wonder why Zerbinetta is a role that she has performed worldwide, and why fans and critics alike definitely love her for this character. She's able to give Zerbinetta this spunky, feisty, yet very sweet and understanding and quite philosophical feel about this character. Not to mention, her attacks on the notes were very clean and very polished all around. With her bright sounding, sweet, lyric coloratura soprano voice, she was able to make Zerbinetta a very wonderful and very, very likable and very involving character as well. She definitely has a lot of great moments in this opera, and not to mention, she's absolutely very pretty. She definitely used her fine physique, very, very girlish physique as Zerbinetta, to such great advantages, and it's no wonder why fans and critics love her for this type of character. And then we get to the four other comedians, Harlequin, Scaramuccio, Brighella, and Truffaldino, who were sung respectively by the following male singers. We have Marcus Verba, who I saw last night as Marcello, Wynne Evans, Paul Schweinster, and Jeremy White. Well, Jeremy White, who I saw last night, as the role of Benoit. And these four gentlemen have a lot of great chemistry. When you combine Marcus Verba's lyric baritone to Jeremy White's basso buffo to Win Evans' light lyric tenor to Paul Schweinsteiger's buffo tenor voice or lyric tenor voice. This is definitely a great combination of voices that I've ever heard in this production of Ariadne auf Naxos. This is definitely a very memorable quartet of male singers. And the trio of nymphs were equally sung very beautifully by the following singers: Sophia Fomina, Karen Cargill, and Keandra Howarth. Lyrical return soprano, contralto, and light lyric soprano respectively, as their thoughts would, state. They sang very beautifully. They were definitely in harmony, and their chemistry with each other, very great, especially when it comes to Keandra Howarth as Echo. She was the one that stood out for me. The way she was able to mimic Karita Mattila's ahs were just absolutely astonishing. It was just wow. It was just pure wow that Keandra was able to darken her voice a bit to be able to imitate Mattila's ahs very well. Well, what more can you expect? This was definitely just fantastic. What more can you expect from some nymph by the name of Echo? Well, she basically imitates other people's voices. It was just wow. So yeah, she was definitely the standout for me. But it's safe to say that all three wonderful female vocalists sung very, very beautifully. The role of the music master was sung by veteran lyric baritone. Nowadays he specializes in the character baritone and the more dramatic baritone repertoire. We have Sir Thomas Allen, who, even though he's currently 70, sounds very, very fresh. I actually saw him on DVD as the speaker from The Magic Flute. I also saw a couple of clips on him. One as Don Giovanni, who he sang very well, and I think another one where he sang the Credo from Otello. And here, like I said, he was still in very fine shape in terms of his voice and in terms of his stage presence. This is definitely by far a great example of longevity. Even though he's currently 70, he is still singing roles like this to this very day, and all I have to say is kudos to you, Sir Thomas Allen. You definitely are one of the best performers of this opera, and may you have many more years of singing. May you never grow tired of it as well. And then we have Christoph Quest as the Majordomo. Now, Christoph Quest is a German actor who I actually saw on YouTube as the Pascha Selim in a couple of productions of the Entführung aus dem Serail. One was from Geneva, the other was from Frankfurt, and the other was from Barcelona. Well, I basically saw them on YouTube. So here, as the Majordomo, he was absolutely great in this speaking role. I kind of noticed that he used a little bit of a British accent. Maybe it was me. But nonetheless, when it comes to the role of the Majordomo, you need a native German speaker to be able to play, or even a very fluent German speaker, to be able to play off this type of writing very, very effectively. And then in the small roles of the servants, like the wig maker, the dancing master, well, he's basically a teacher, and the lackey and the officer, we have Ashley Riches, Ed Lyon, Ji-Hoon Kim, and David Butt Phillip. They all sang very well, even though their roles were very minute. So overall, this definitely was a great evening for all of the singers of this opera. And Antonio Pappano's conducting was very well done, even though I did notice that there was a bit of a slip-up in the start of Ein schönes Wunder. There was something that didn't really sound so great in the wind section, but other than that, I thought it was just well conducted. So overall, what a way to end my opera reviews here in London with this charming and very beautiful opera, which is, well, Richard Strauss's Ariadne auf Naxos. This production, well, it was great. The singing was absolutely top tier, and the conducting by Antonio Pappano was absolutely fantastic. So if you haven't seen this production of Ariadne auf Naxos yet, go ahead and watch it. You will never be disappointed when it comes to great singing coming from Mattila, Archibald, Donose, Sacca, Sir Thomas Allen, and many, many others. You will definitely not be disappointed, especially with the production of this opera, which I have to say is very interesting. So this definitely was fantastic, and this was definitely ending my London opera reviews with a bang. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, where I will be giving some updates for my reviews in Milan. And, well, just to give you a hint, I have one opera review in Milan, which is going to be shown at the La Scala. So until then, this is Antoni signing off and wishing you all a good night, and I will see you tomorrow in Milan.